Okay, so wanted to take some time to do another recording on Snowflake, the Elastic Data Warehouse in the cloud here, and just use this demo to address one of the biggest questions and one of the most frequently asked questions that I get about Snowflake, which is how do I get data from my local data center, from my local environment into Snowflake, right? This will be a hands-on demo, but I thought I'd start with um, a demonstration here and an image just to kind of explain things and put things in context and perspective. So if you look here at this diagram, various data loading scenarios here, some basic ones. We have up top here data files that would represent, some data that's local in your data center, local to your environment. Of course, we have, what we all know is the cloud here, and within the cloud, there's a big rectangle. This rectangle is basically S3. That can be divvied up into two parts here. The blue section is S3 buckets that we maintain for customers that are private S3 buckets in a Snowflake account, right? They're called a user stage that you can access. Or you can have private S3 buckets that customers have themselves, right? And from there, of course, Snowflake is a data warehouse, a relational database that exists in the cloud. And from this S3 environment, either a user stage or a private S3 bucket, you can subsequently parallelize a copy into the database. And so what we're going to do here is we're going to show some of the basic ways to do both, right? So I'm going to take some CSV files that I have locally and put them into a user stage, and then subsequently copy them into, and load them into Snowflake. I also have some JSON data that I'm going to take and put it to a private S3 bucket and also put it into Snowflake as well. So with that, let's just take a look at this, right? So I'm in Snowflake. You've seen this environment from the other video that I did. I just brought up a little local script that I have here to that I'm going to use to load, put some data, to stage some data up there, and then subsequently load some data. So I started with the picture here. I kind of put it in context. But first, let's take a look at the files that we want to actually stage and move out to the cloud, right? So I have here a folder that has some Chicago crime data here, right? It's a simple CSV file. It's 1 gig, a little over 1 gig, 1.3 gig, not massive. I can certainly just put this up into the cloud, load it as is. Performance would be just fine. One of the things that I've done here, though, and this is just something I tell customers to do, is what you want to do is take advantage of parallelism on load when we're loading data in Snowflake, right? And so to do that, I tell people, let's take a big file here and divvy it up into lots of smaller files, right? And again, on this example, it wouldn't matter, but when we start talking about hundreds of gigs and terabytes of data, we want to start splitting things up. So I took this Chicago crime data set, it's a CSV, and I used gsplit just to split it into 20 little files. There's a whole bunch of ways you can split data, right? And I won't necessarily cover that topic here, but whether it be through a gsplit utility or through an ETL tool, there's a bunch of ways to split up your data into even chunks here. But really what I did was I just split it up and then zipped them up. And this is what we want to now stage and put these files out into the cloud, right? So I'm going to do that. And so to do this, one of the first things I'm going to do is I need a command line utility that's going to allow me to put the data up into my Snowflake user stage. And the way to get that is to use the SnowSQL command line client, right? So if I go to help here and go to download within my UI, I have a command line client here that I can download, and I've done that already, so I'm just going to show this to you. So I'm just going to come back over here, open this up here. I'm just going to open up SnowSQL, which is my command line client, and I'm going to log into it. Okay, and when I come into it, again, it's just a command line utility that we would all expect for a database to have. I'm just going to list what's in my directory right now. So if I just do list and just look at the root of my directory here, I see that I've already put some files up into the cloud, right? It's up in my user stage in Snowflake. Behind the scenes, it's an S3 bucket, right? But this is what it looks like. I already put that big giant. This is a different file actually. This CMS data. I got some weather data out here too. I'm gonna put all of that Chicago crimes data out in here to load. So if I come back here, I'm gonna use just this simple statement here, and I'm gonna copy this. Come back over here. And basically all this is doing is a secure put of these local files, these crimes files that I divvied up here, and put them into a folder called crimes within my user stage. And so I'll just hit OK here. A couple other things to note is on the command line utility, I can set the parallelization as well as whether I want auto compress on or off. By default, it's true, but as a force of habit, I tell people to just zip things up themselves and then set this to false in the command line utility. Parallelization could go anywhere from 1 to 100. You can hurt yourself if you set up too much parallelization where it doesn't make sense, right? I'm on my home Wi-Fi and I'm using my Mac here, right? So 4 seems to be a sweet spot. I can go up to 100 here, but if I don't have enough throughput, enough processors, what have you, you can start hurting yourself by setting up too much parallelization. But it can be configured. So if you have a whole cluster of stuff that's moving data, you can certainly do that too. Okay, so a real simple put command is really all it takes to move data from a local environment up into the cloud. And again, what I'm doing here, just to put it back into perspective, I'm loading some local CSV files through this put command into a user stage, just putting it out into the cloud. That's really all I'm doing here. Okay. So while we finish that, I'm just going to come back over here. And then just talk about the other data that I want to have, that I want to put up into the cloud as well. So I've got some semi-structured data that I also want to put out here. So if I look, let me just bring it up here. I have another folder here that has a whole bunch of JSON data. Pretty simple, straightforward stuff like logs, logs 1 to logs 30 here of all this JSON data, right? If I want to look at how this looks, I've got one of the examples up here. It's just a whole bunch of files that have, a whole bunch of records. I think each file has 1,000 JSON records in here, right? So this is what we're going to load. We're going to stage it up into the cloud and load it into the database as well, right? And that's all of these files here. So to do that, again, coming back to our diagram, right? This is where I want to take some local JSON files, some local files here, and this time I'm going to use the S3 command utility, which is just a public utility that you get, from Amazon to move data to S3, private S3 buckets. And I'm going to move it up here and then load it from there later too. So if I want to do that, I can come up over here. In fact, let me just take my little command that I know here, and let me also look at. Here's my private S3 bucket. It's really got nothing in here. Let me just refresh this. And there's nothing in here, right? So what we're going to do is I'm going to, let me see where we had it here. There it is. I'm just going to put this command in here. Again, S3 command to do a put of all of those logs data, that JSON data set, put it into my private S3 bucket. And there it goes, right? It's going to start moving those 30 files over, and it's going to do so pretty quickly too. I'm getting a little error here. Oh, there we go. It should start moving them over now, no problem. It should happen pretty fast. There we go. So while that's working, here they're going to go real fast now. While that's working, I can also come back over here. I can see these other CSV files were moved up to my user stage. And now again, if I were to do an ls of my directory, I can see now that I've got those crimes files sitting out there in my Snowflake user stage that I can now copy into the database, right? Same thing over here. Whoops, let me come back to the other window. I can see that I loaded up all of these S3 files as well. So when I come into here and refresh this, here's my private S3 bucket that now has all of that data. So again, what did we do here? I just moved some local data to a user stage and also some local data to a private S3 bucket, right? Now I want to start loading this stuff into Snowflake, and it's pretty easy. We've seen this before, right? So let me just minimize this here. Minimize that. Minimize this. Give myself some real estate here. Now we can start loading some data. Real quick here, I did create a stage. And again, if I go back to databases, look at my database here, and look at a stage that I've created a pointer to my private S3 bucket called BMG S3. So when I list this now, when I run this, it says I don't have a current database. I have to have a current database in order to do work. That's right. And then I will also select my warehouse here. Let's try this again. There we go. So here's all of my data that I now put out in my private S3 bucket. So now loading data is real simple, right, guys? So I can select anywhere in this statement here to create this crimes table in my database. That's been created. Certainly, if I do a count star from here, I should get 0 records, and there it is. Same thing for storing, creating a table to store my JSON data, right? I'm going to create a table here called cust logs with one column called variant to just hold the JSON. And that's created, and again, if I do a select count star from it, there it is, nothing in there. Now I'm going to load data from my user stage using a file format that I created called CSV1, which is just basic comma delimited type stuff. But basically, load into my crimes table everything from that stage data set, right? And so I'm going to run this, and this is going to take about, I'm going to say about 15 seconds to load 5.7 million records worth of data using our extra small cluster. I suppose I should have used the small just to make it look a little bit better. It would have gotten done in 7 seconds or so. Here we go, right? And I see that the status is partially loaded. I purposely did this because I wanted people to see what it's like if something wasn't loaded perfectly, right? That's one of the other questions I get asked a lot. What happens if it errors out? And there's things that I can do with my on error clause to say, hey, should I continue? Should I stop? Should I just skip that file and move on? I have a couple different options there, right? This one, I purposely set it so that these files had like some extra blank lines that aren't being parsed, and that's what we're seeing in all of this. But all of the data really did load, out of 288,000 records on each one here. I'm seeing 1 or 2 lines on this here, right? But all the data did load. In fact, we can take a look at that in a little bit. If I ran this again, by the way, just to kind of show this to people, if I tried running this statement again, what's going to happen is that you're going to see no rows processed, which is, or no files processed, which is really nice because if I look at the load history of that crimes table, I see that it gives me the MD5 checksums of the files that have been loaded. So that means if I tried loading the data again, Snowflake is smart enough to say, listen, I've seen this file already and absolutely nothing has changed to it. I've already loaded it, so I'm not even going to bother, and it won't do it again, which is really nice. Okay. Now I'm also going to load this data that I put into the private S3 bucket by saying, hey, copy into the cust logs table from that private S3 bucket. File format is JSON. Put a pattern here to look for logs. Let me just run this one. And there we go. All of that data loaded nice and clean here. And now we can just do some testing. Count star from crimes. I should see 5.7 million records. There we go. We can have a little fun with the data set here. Take a look at some of this. So all the Chicago crime data from 2001 and 2015. Robbery, battery, where not to walk in Chicago, that type of thing. Again, ANSI SQL to do a group by here. Again, using the smallest warehouse cluster that we have, extra small, it burns through this stuff pretty fast. Also, if I want to start looking at semi-structured data, I loaded that data into that cust logs table. So I can start doing, a select count star, loaded 30,000 records. I can start, saying, hey, let's select everything from that table. Here's what's interesting again, right? 30,000 records. I'm going to list them all here. Here's how I'm actually storing semi-structured data. And I open this up, and here it is, right? Here's how I'm actually storing it, which is really nice. And now I can start writing SQL that walks the tree of these elements to get things back. So here's an example where, let me comment this out, where we say, hey, select from, from that cust logs table. Here's where I'm looking at, actual little bits and elements in here. I can say execute. And here it is, right? So I started getting, structured data back. And again, I like to tell people we can do pretty well with unstructured data that's within comment fields, right? So here's where I'm actually searching those free-form text fields, that comment field, for some criteria, and let's see what we get back here, right? Again, just found 109 records across 30,000 pretty much instantaneously. And again, nothing's cached or anything like that. But what I wanted to show here again is that I quickly loaded data from a local environment up to Snowflake through one of two techniques. Either the user stage using the command line client, or through the S3 command utility to load it into a private S3 bucket. And that's really all there is to it. One of the other questions that I do get from people is, well, what happens when I've got dozens or hundreds of terabytes of data? That initial migration could be really painful. And so I will just say that there's a few options and alternatives for data migration with Snowflake. This isn't an exhaustive list. There's some other ways to do it, but I just wanted to kind of mention for initial migrations of data into the cloud, you got things like AWS Direct Connect, which basically give you a high bandwidth connection directly into AWS's infrastructure for moving data from your data center. I haven't actually seen Snowball yet. I'd love to actually see this. It came out a few months ago. But that's basically a little hardware device that you plug into your data center. You put your 50 terabytes or so of data onto this device. It's ready to be shipped. It's fully encrypted, and then when it gets to AWS, they put it right into their data center, and boom, it's pretty much instantly loaded. And then a third route to go is, if you want to go the software route, there's something called Utility Cloud Beam for S3, which again is a software tool that really specializes in ultra compression of data, so less is going over the wire up into the cloud. Puts in S3, and again, as we saw before, from there you can copy directly from S3 right into your Snowflake database. So that is that. That's what we wanted to show people, just simply moving data from a local environment up into the cloud and into Snowflake. So hope you found that interesting. We'll see you on the next demo.